Everyone wants to live a long and healthy life with a body which looks and performs how they want it to. Yet so many search for the answers by taking the advice from peers and by following the dietary and training plans of people with different goals and outcomes to which they're searching.
Within the health and fitness industry, there's a significant amount of disinformation from a wide variety of self-proclaimed experts, never really tying together what you want or need to hear. There are people who are performing at their best, and there are others who don't know where to begin. This podcast aims to take you through the compendium of what is diet and fitness to allow you to design your own training programs to meet your specific needs.
In each episode, we're going to discuss a new topic surrounding diet, fitness and mindset, which builds on previous knowledge. This allows you to understand and appreciate the fundamentals before we delve into the more specific needs of top-level athletes.
This podcast is hosted by James and Max. James is a registered dietitian and nutritionist who's worked within the NHS and private sector. He specialises in improving athletic performance, enhancing training recovery and accelerating muscle growth. And I'm Max, a strength and conditioning coach who specialises in athletic performance and personal development. I've worked with GB athletes in bobsleigh and rowing, and also alongside semi-professional and professional rugby players.
Together, we hope to provide a wealth of knowledge and value to you, the listener. Thanks for tuning in. This is My Athletic Compendium. Again. Hi guys, and welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode 1. I know we did a bit of an intro video last week, explaining who we are, what we do, where we've come from. But essentially, this is episode 1. We're going to talk about energy today. It's basically the fundamentals of what diet, nutrition and exercise revolve around. Obviously you need good training programs, but if you're not fueling yourself effectively, then you won't be performing effectively. Obviously we've got the video on as well, so if you can see us, hello, you're obviously on YouTube, and if you're listening to us, we are on the podcast as well.
I find it really funny how we're talking about energy, and I've absolutely got none today.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Should be a fun one.
I think we all could do with a bit more sleep, but I'm definitely fueling myself well. Lunch breaks are doing the well.
Fueling.
So essentially, we have 3 energy systems that we use in our body. I'm going to talk about them for a little bit, and then Max is going to talk about energy and different exercises that we'd use them for. So essentially, we've got 3 different energy systems. We've got anaerobic, which means without oxygen. We've got aerobic, which means with oxygen, and we've got phosphocreatine. Let's not worry about the phosphocreatine system right now. Let's focus on the anaerobic and the aerobic system. Max's little ping has just gone off, which is great.
Brilliant.
So carry on with the show. So essentially, the anaerobic system, like I said, is without oxygen. That is using energy or using carbohydrates to fuel or provide us with some energy without using oxygen. And you will all be familiar with running really hard for sort of 10 seconds and feeling absolutely exhausted after, and that's because you're not breathing and you're running at such a high intensity that you can't use the oxygen, and you're essentially able to run for those 10 seconds, but you feel tired after, and that's because you're getting breakdown of carbohydrates without oxygen. So that's the fuel, the breakdown of carbohydrates, but essentially you're building up something called lactic acid, which we can talk about later. It's not that important, but without oxygen you have a limited supply or limited ability to produce energy. Then with the aerobic systems, that's when you're going for like a light jog, walking around, breathing essentially. When you're walking to and from your car, driving your car, that all uses oxygen. So you're breathing as you're doing it, and you're basically breaking down fats and carbohydrates to fuel your activities. That's a lot more sustainable. You can produce way more energy than if you had no oxygen going. That's why it's our most favoured energy system, and that's why you can run an ultra marathon or walk one. I certainly would walk one. But that's why you can do that, and you can't run a marathon, as in you can't sprint a marathon, because that intensity is way too hard for the production of energy. Essentially, Max, what talk to me about energy systems.
So
go on.
Yeah. No, I was just rolling on from what you just said. Is like you said, you got aerobic, anaerobic. A lot of team sports, you're going to have kind of a mixture of both.
Yeah.
You're going to do sort of intervals of sprints, but in between you're going to be doing some jogging and so on. So and then obviously what we're trying to do is to improve your performance is try and build both of those side of things. If you are a team sports player, I'm talking about things like a type of training called fartlek training, which is intervals of doing higher intensity and lower intensity. So you can go on, say, a 5 kilometer run, but then you're doing intervals of sprints for 30 seconds of that 5k or whatever, and changing the intensity around. You're basically going to be using both aerobic and anaerobic. If you're a 400 meter sprinter, you're kind of on the cusp of being from aerobic and anaerobic. It is an anaerobic sprint, it is a still sprint, but it's kind of on that cusp of that longest duration that you can go before you have to start breathing properly. So and then if you are kind of a sprinter, like a 100 meter sprinter, then that is going to be anaerobic. You're not able to breathe.
Or
quickly.
weightlifting,
anything that requires maximum effort. Excuse me, and short bouts of higher intensity exercise, and then anything from marathon running, like that kind of thing, is going to be aerobic because you're breathing.
Absolutely. And essentially, the nutrients. There's certain nutrients that we obtain from food. Obviously, we don't eat. So some of you would have heard of protein, fats, and carbohydrates. Those are what we call macronutrients. Alcohol is also another macronutrient, but we won't talk about that yet. So essentially, you've got protein, fats, and carbohydrates, the 3 macronutrients, and we use them in those energy systems to produce energy to allow us to do those activities. God, I'm waffling. Essentially, you get 4 calories per gram of protein and carbohydrate that you eat, and you get 9 calories per gram of fat that you eat. So obviously, if you eat a gram of fat compared to a gram of carbohydrates, you're going to get way more calories, which in turn leads to way more energy production. But those certain energy systems that we spoke about can only use certain energy sources. So we're basically saying in those high intensity exercise, you are primarily using carbohydrates as your fuel. If you are someone who doesn't eat any carbohydrates, like you are following a keto diet, you're not eating any carbohydrates, you're going to have very low reserves of carbohydrates, which means that when you want to do those high intensity exercises, you'll find them very, very difficult, and you won't be able to sustain yourself for very long. So that's why it's important as athletes, and like you were saying for that fartlek training, where you're doing bouts of both, you need essentially all the different macronutrients in your diet.
They're all important in their own sense.
Exactly. We are athletes at the end of the day. We are not physique. As much as we would like to look great, we are not training primarily for your physique. So you do need all those different macronutrients in your diet. When we're talking about aerobic exercise, you are primarily using fat and carbohydrates in a sort of 50-50 balance, depending on how fast within that aerobic training you are going. Over long distances, I'm talking sort of over 90 minutes of exercising, you will start to get some protein breakdown, and that's generally from your muscle stores, but that isn't a primary fuel source. You won't be using that if you're just doing steady state low intensity exercise. You are primarily using just the carbohydrates and fats. Now I think it's really important to say where we get protein, fats and carbohydrates. Obviously, like I said, food, we eat food. We don't eat protein, fats and carbohydrates. If you have a chicken curry, for example, you've got carbohydrates, you've got fats, and you've got proteins. Food, fruit, for example, is high in carbohydrates, but it's very low in fat and protein. So although some foods can be higher in certain macronutrients, they will still contain, even if it's very minimal, some of the other macronutrients. You're never going to find a food that is just 100% carbohydrate and one food that is 100% protein, unless you are getting the refined versions of that. But we eat whole foods. So essentially, foods which are high in carbohydrates are pasta, bread, rice, fruits. Now, although there's different types of carbohydrates, which I'll touch on in a minute, fruits still fall under the carbohydrate category. Sugar does, so the stuff that you'd put in your tea, coffee, would fall under the carbohydrates. You've also got proteins. Foods which are high in proteins are generally your animal meats or products, so like cheese, eggs. You've also got vegetarian and vegan alternatives like corn, tofu. There's beans, pulses, lentils are all high in proteins. And foods which are high in fat are like your oils, nuts, fish oils, so the outside of fish is also quite high in fat. Shall I talk about the different types of protein, do you think, and the different types of carbohydrate?
Yeah, the simpler.
Yeah. So essentially you've got 3 different types of carbohydrate available. You've got complex carbohydrates, and that was when I was talking about the pasta, bread, rice, couscous, tortilla wraps, all the different types of breads and wheat. Essentially they're called complex because they need to be broken down, and they're essentially long chains of sugar. So when you eat them, they take time to be broken down and digested to release sugar into your body so your body can use the sugar. So sugar, again, is the second type of carbohydrate, and that falls in the same category of a carbohydrate. So it doesn't need as much breaking down, but it's still a carbohydrate, and that's why it's termed simple. The third type is fibre, and that is like on the hard surfaces of your fruit and vegetables. On a kiwi, you've got that like hard outer surface, that's really fibrous. On the outside of courgette and aubergines, you've got the hard surfaces, that's fibre. So that doesn't provide you with much energy, or in terms of the carbohydrates, but it's really important for your body. It's really important for you, making sure that everything's functioning properly, and it's essentially bowel function. I didn't want to say the word bowel, but I'm a dietitian, so I can't refrain.
You're allowed to say it.
I'm allowed to say it. It's really important for that. You've also got two different types of proteins. You've got complete proteins and you've got incomplete proteins. Complete proteins just means it contains all the essential amino acids you need. If we're confusing you already with what essential amino acids are, don't worry, we're going to cover them in the next episode. You've got incomplete proteins, which just means it doesn't contain all the amino acids that your body needs. And we basically say that the complete amino acids are the meats, the animal products, and corn and tofu. So things like your beans, pulses, don't contain all the amino acids you need. And then fat, just to get even more complex, don't worry, we're not going to get too more complex in this episode, but you've got saturated fatty acids. Saturated fats are like the things that are solid. The fats that you would associate as solid fats are like the animal fat, the stuff that you'd see on the side of bacon or pork. That's a saturated fat. Now, unsaturated fats are the oils that you would see. So, olive oil, rapeseed oil, sunflower oil, they're unsaturated fatty acids. And then you've got one more type of fatty acids, which are trans fats, and they're a type of oil, but it's when you heat them up quite hot and fry your food in it, and then you get trans fats. So although I'm waffling, I hope that's given you a bit of an indication about what foods essentially fall into those macronutrients, so that when we later talk about the energy systems and carbohydrates, you can understand where you would get the carbohydrates from. Definitely.
Yeah. I think if anything, if you take anything away from this where you're a little bit unsure about, I think because we have covered quite a lot, is write it down, take it home, do a bit of research on it if you're unsure about something that you've spoken about, to do it and research it. But I think the biggest take home is that fueling yourself is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely.
And trying to get a big range of different macronutrients is going to help you recovery, is going to help your energy.
A wide range of foods as well, to make sure that you're covering those macronutrients. One thing we haven't touched on, which we will touch on just briefly, is that everybody's energy requirements are completely different. You may look at someone who is doing something very similar to you, but they will have completely different energy requirements, and that is because your specific energy requirements are based on your height, your age, your sex, your level of physical activity. So, Max and I are very similar ages, but I do a desk job. I'm sat down pretty much all day, whereas you're on your feet all day. So you're going to be burning way more calories than I am. We both tend to do similar amounts of exercise, but again, you do more activity during your day. Now, if I was a female and you were a male and we did exactly the same thing, you would be burning more calories than I would, and that's simply because men tend to have more muscle mass than women, which is more active in terms of using energy. If you want to know what your specific requirements are, a useful little tool to download is MyFitnessPal. You can get it on most app stores. You just submit your details onto it, so your age, height, level of activity during the day, and also level of activity in terms of exercise that you do, and it essentially puts your details into the Henry equation, it's called, and it works out how many calories you need per day. We will obviously talk about tracking calories at a later date and whether it's important, whether it's not. It all depends on you as a person and also depending on what you're doing. But essentially, if you want to just know a ballpark figure of what you need energy-wise, then that's a good, useful tool to utilise. I feel like we've waffled enough. Obviously, we want to keep these episodes nice and short, so you're not stuck with us for hours on end, and you can just listen to us in the car or watch us on YouTube nice and quickly. So I think we'll wrap it up there as long as you're all happy. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, not in particular. I think it's a good starter, a good introduction, and then we can dive a little bit deeper into it as we go on. It is a compendium. It is a sort of a journey, I suppose, of going from here are the basics. The basics now. We can dive a little bit deeper and just broaden your knowledge. So, as a person, as an athlete, as someone who wants to get fitter or stronger or whatever it is, you're building on your knowledge and you're getting enjoyment out of learning.
Exactly. We don't want to talk about too many complex things to start off with. Essentially, we want you to be on the journey with us, develop your knowledge. We didn't learn this stuff overnight, so there has to be a starting block. If this is all old news to you and you're way ahead of it, then that's absolutely fine. Stay tuned. There will be more in-depth stuff. We are just covering all bases so that everyone can stay for the ride and everyone can get value out of it. But yeah, stay tuned for next week. We're already looking forward to it, so hope you guys are too. Thanks for listening on the podcast, and thanks for watching if you're on YouTube.
What was it? Arrivederci?
Arrivederci!
I feel like that's just going to be our sign-off now. Oh, nice.
Everyone needs a sign-off. How's this? Arrivederci! I really hope that's recorded.